Shalom, shalom. Today we're going to talk about the moon. Now, like the sun, the moon is an intricate part of our Creator's timepiece. The sun, we're told in Genesis 1, is the greater luminary in the heavens. Its assignments given on the fourth day of creation are recorded in the book of Jubilees. Jubilees 2:8 through 11. And on the fourth day he created the sun and the moon and the stars, and set them in the firmament of the heaven, to give light upon the earth, and to rule over the day and the night, and divide the light from the darkness. And Yahuwah appointed the sun to be a great sign on the earth for days, and for Sabbaths, and for months, and for feasts, and for years, and for the Sabbath of years, and for the Jubilees, and for all the seasons of the years. And it, the sun, divides the light from the darkness for prosperity, that all things may prosper which shoot and grow on the earth. These three kinds he made on the fourth day. Then if the sun regulates the timing of all these moed set time, then what is the duty of the moon? What role does she play in the Creator's timepiece? Because the book of Jubilees also warns us about using the moon in the wrong manner. Jubilees chapter 6, verses 34 through 38. And all the children of Israel will forget, all the children of Israel, that includes the tribe of Judah, will forget and will not find the path of the years, and will forget the new months and seasons and Sabbaths. And they will go wrong as to all the order of the years. For I know, and from henceforth I will declare it unto thee. And it is not of my own devising, for the book lies written before me, and on the heavenly tablets the division of days is ordained, lest they forget the feasts of the covenant. Well, the feast of the covenant are the ones we find in Leviticus 23, and walk according to the feasts of the Gentiles, after their error and after their ignorance. For there will be those who assuredly make observations of the moon, how it disturbs the seasons, and comes in from year to year 10 days too soon. For this reason, the years will come upon them, when they will disturb the order, and make an abominable day a day of testimony, and an unclean day a feast day. And they will confound all the days, the holy with the unclean, and the unclean day with the holy, for they will go wrong as to the months, and Sabbaths, and feasts, and jubilees. For this reason I command and testify to thee, that thou may testify to them. For after thy death thy children will disturb them, so they will not make the year 364 days only. For this reason they will go wrong as to the new months, seasons, Sabbaths, and festivals. But Enoch, on the other hand, tells us that the moon is light to the righteous, and yet he also tells us it's darkness to the sinners. Enoch 41:8. For the sun changes oft, for a blessing or a curse, and the course of the path of the moon is light to the righteous, and darkness to the sinners, in the name of the Most High, who made a separation between light and darkness, and divided the spirits of men, and strengthened the spirits of righteousness in the name of his righteousness. Now, for the longest time, this verse puzzled me. How can the moon be good and bad? What did it mean? It wasn't until I fully understood what the priests were using the moon for that this verse finally came to light. Simply put, as we will bring to light, those who use it correctly will know the Shemitah years of release, a blessing for sure. And those who don't use her correctly, well, Jubilees just told us what happens. We will miss out on being in our Creator's presence at his appointed time. Imagine showing up for a meeting with the big boss a day late. The Sabbath is the mark of Yahweh's people, and being there is how we get that mark. Just in these first few verses, we already know that the moon isn't used to set the months, or the Sabbaths, or the feast days, or the new year. So what then do we use her for? In today's study, we're going to look at Scripture, the books of Enoch and Jubilees, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and the physical movements of the moon. We will search for the clues that point us to the duties that were assigned to her on the fourth day of creation, and try to discover how she is really a blessing to those who use her correctly, and how it reckons the year in harmony with the sun and stars, making the year complete and 364 days. The Holy Grail, so to speak, for me has always been to know the true Sabbath. From the time I got my first Bible, I was fascinated by its historic tales of ancient people set in foreign lands. Even as a child, though, I could see a concurrent theme emerge from its pages about the Sabbaths and feast days. And I remember asking myself the question, why isn't my family doing these things? As the Creator said they were to be done forever. Of course, in my day, we didn't outright question authority, so I set it in the back of my mind until I got older. I could see throughout the scriptures how important the Sabbath was to our Creator. He said that it was a mark of his people. And more than anything, I wanted to be one of his people, to have his mark on me and to live happily in his kingdom. I think maybe I saw it as a rescue from my crazy childhood, and remember feeling discouraged at the improbability of ever knowing exactly when creation was, so we could then know what day was truly the seventh. Of course, being a Mormon, Christian, Southern Baptist kid, yeah, I did say I had a crazy childhood, didn't I? I thought that the Sabbath was on Sunday and wanted to know how those in charge of such things knew that it was the actual seventh day from creation. How did they know? It became my quest to know. The Jews think they know, as do others. But it is all just theory with no real solid proof to when the first week of creation occurred. Puranic Hinduism says creation was 77.76 trillion years ago. Reckoned by the early Syrian Christians, the year of creation is 5490 BC. According to Irish theologian James Ussher and John Lightfoot a decade earlier, October 23rd, 4004 BC at 9 a.m. is the exact time and date of creation. And finally, the Jews believe that 3641 BC is that year. So then, who really knows? Now, happily, as a grown woman in Yahuwah, I have come to understand that the Father did indeed give us a creation marker, a straight path back to his creation-based set times. It was in 1999 when I started looking at different calendars. A lot of people thought we were going to be sent back to the Dark Ages when the computers tried to turn over from December 31st, 1999 to January 1st, 2000. Also, speculations paraded across the headlines about the Mayan calendar coming to an end of its cycle as 2012 was quickly approaching. This is when I started asking questions beyond my pastor's pay grade and became disenchanted with Christian teachings. They were basically throwing out half the Bible, a chunk that even at 10 years old I knew held an important part of the story. By 2002, I had completely stopped going to organized church and started learning the Torah and lunar calendar. At first I thought, aha, this is it, believing that the moon held the key to the true Sabbath, that it was the sign spoken of in Genesis 1. But like the lost city of gold, the lunar Sabbath held no more truth than the mystical El Dorado. And I did end up, though, following the lunar calendar and Sabbaths for about 8 or 9 years while I studied the Torah with a private teacher. Month after month, we would go out and sight the new crescent moon. It seemed reasonable and scriptural at the time. After all, aren't there many scriptures that tell us to celebrate the new moon festivals? Except it didn't always feel right to me, because it didn't always align with scripture after all, especially at the time of Passover. And my husband can attest to the fact that I always became a wreck around Passover, checking and double checking our sightings and our counts. But hey, we only had to fudge a scripture or two to make it fit perfectly. No problem. Like those years when the weekly lunar Sabbath fell directly on the Passover, then what Sabbath was it that Mary waited to be over before going to the tomb after 3 days? It just didn't fit each time. But what I did take away from that lunar wilderness walk was that the division of days are laid out in the heavenly tablets. That there is a cycle to the Sabbaths, just as there is to all the feasts in Leviticus 23. Once we understood that the Creator's calendar is circular and cyclic through the books of Enoch, we realized that the Sabbath is set celestially, confirmed in the Dead Sea Scrolls, never moving from its place cycle to cycle, because there is only one cycle to creation, and the Sabbath is always 3 days after the 4th day sign assigned to the sun at creation. We are instructed to memorialize the moed, the set times of that cycle after cycle. Leviticus 23 lists the moed of the cycle, starting with the Sabbath and ending with Sukkot. Then why would any of these memorials be set different than the others? They wouldn't. They're memorials of the original creation cycle. That's it. We're told to memorialize them. Now, the moon is used as a timepiece by many, and perhaps not to set the Sabbaths by, like we were doing, but rather the months and feasts, like the Jews, or as a second witness to the new year. I have seen some groups start the new year with the new moon after the vernal equinox, and other groups just pick a new moon closest, even if that means their year starts before spring is officially marked in the heavens by the greater luminary. Jubilees 6:38. For this reason I command and testify to you, that you may testify to them, for after your death your children will disturb them, so that they will not make the year 364 days only. And for this reason they will go wrong as to the new months and seasons and Sabbaths and festivals. So right here we can see the error in waiting for the new moon after the vernal equinox to start the year, for it would add anywhere from 1 to 6 days to the year. And for those who pick the new moon before the actual turn of the year are making the year less than 364 days. The same applies to what I call those other ladies in waiting. Those who wait for the Gregorian Wednesday to appear after the vernal equinox. Or again, in some cases, the closest Wednesday, which again can fall before the vernal equinox, like the lunar people. They use a Catholic calendar to try to prove creation. They try to convince us that the priests knew what a Wednesday was 2,000 years before it was created by man, adding or subtracting from the exact 364 days that both Enoch and the Book of Jubilees tells us is the number of days in a year. Psalms 90:12 tells us to teach us to number our days so that we may bring a heart of wisdom. Since it is often touted as proof that the moon is a witness to the new year, let's jump right into the Dead Sea Scrolls to see exactly how the priest used her to number days. In the creation week, on the 4th day, Eloah started the heavenly clocks that would impart the rhythms of the heavenly lights from there on. The priests believed that time started on day 4 of creation, and the priestly order was set accordingly. Some will say that the moon was full on the 4th day. We believe the moon was at the beginning of her cycle. The moon had just been newly assigned her duties, whereas according to Enoch, the full moon comes 2 weeks later. The priest understood this, as we will see. The problem for calendar makers is to reconcile the apparent motion of the sun and moon. Seen from the earth, the sun goes around every 24 hours. The seasons are caused by the tilt of the earth in its orbit, and most years this orbit takes 365 sunrises. The lunar Synodic month lasts 29 days from new moon to new moon, which is, as we will see, exactly what Enoch tells us. The lunar Metonic cycle is a period of 19 solar years, in which there are 235 lunations, or synodic months, after which the moon's phases recur on the same day of the solar year. History would tell you that this lunar cycle was discovered by the Athenian astronomer Meton. That's why it was called the Metonic cycle, in 432 BC. However, it would seem that the holy priest of Yahuwah knew this lunar cycle all along. Dead Sea Scroll number 4Q319 is a list of the heads of the priestly families that the scroll's author used to create a type of algorithm in order to keep track of sabbatical and jubilee years. Essentially, the writer is tracking the relationship between 3 elements: the jubilee periods, the sabbatical years, and what the author calls in Hebrew an oath or sign. The first element is the jubilee period. Counting inclusively, the 50th year is then the first year of the next cycle. The scroll tabulates by 49-year periods and covers 6 such jubilees. Some Dead Sea Scroll versions use the word conjunction as translation in this scroll for the word oath. The author designates each conjunction or sign with a name. In every case, the names of the conjunctions are always the same, alternating between the priestly families of Gamul and Shechaniah. Now, before we go into what the scroll says, let's take a moment to understand the word conjunction, because I do not believe that this is talking about the lunar conjunction, but rather a conjunction or combination of events. In this case, the event would be the priestly cycle of these two families. The Merriam-Webster Dictionary's definition of conjunction is, first, an uninflected linguistic form that joins together sentences, clauses, phrases, or words. Some common conjunctions are and, but, and although. Second, the act or instance of conjoining, the state of being conjoined, combination working in conjunction with two or more separate entities at the same time. 3, occurrence together in time or space, a concurrence, a conjunction of events. And 4th, the apparent meeting or passing of two or more celestial bodies in the same degree of the zodiac. In the case of this scroll, we will see that the author is keeping track of the sabbatical years by the occurrence or the conjunction of the position of the two families from year to year within each sabbatical cycle. In the copy that I found on archive.org, the translator uses the more appropriate word of sign for the Hebrew word oath rather than the word conjunction. So we're going to read through this scroll, 4Q319. And on the 4th day of the week, it's light on the 4th day of the week of creation in the week of Gamul, the sign or the conjunction of Shechaniah in the 4th year. The sign of Gamul in the year of release, that is the first sabbatical year. So on the 4th day of the week is referring to the New Year day, which the priests always started on the 4th day of the week, stemming from the belief that that is when time began, on the 4th day of creation. The new year is also the 4th day of Gamul. Therefore, the start of the Jubilee cycle began with Gamul at the new year. The first sabbatical cycle also ended with Gamul, as did the first Jubilee cycle, which the author numbers the scroll years as 2 through 7 instead of 1 through 6. So he's numbering the Jubilees as 2 through 7 and not 1 through 6. There's no explanation as to why. But the first cycle is listed with Gamul at the new year, and Shechaniah is the head of the 4th year. The second sabbatical cycle, the sign of Shechaniah in the 3rd year, and the sign of Gamul in the 6th year. The third sabbatical cycle, the sign of Shechaniah in the 2nd year, and the conjunction or the sign of Gamul in the 5th year. The fourth sabbatical cycle, the sign of Shechaniah after the year of release. So we can clearly see the algorithm being laid out in the scroll. It is like a cipher of groupings between the positions of Gamul and Shechaniah within each of the sabbatical and jubilee cycles. The scroll continues with the cipher signs throughout the jubilee cycles, positioning family names and times of service throughout each cycle. The lunar and solar cycles best realign with each other in cycles of 3, 8, 11, 19, 353, 1078, and 1431 years, each increasing in accuracy the farther out we go in the cycle. Notice the big gap between 19 and the next better cycle of 353 years. The 353-year period equals to 18 sets of 19 years plus 1 of 11. Is so perfect that it has a total error of only 0.022 days. That is so accurate that it could possibly be used throughout history without even accumulating an error of even 1 day. Whereas to the 3-year cycle, the moon will appear against the same stars, but in a different phase. A common misconception about the phases of the moon is that they occur as a result of the Earth's shadow being cast upon the surface of the moon by the sun. In fact, it's much less common for the Earth's shadow to appear on the moon due to the angle of the Earth's tilt. And when it does happen, it is known as an eclipse. Lunar phases, on the other hand, are caused by the position of the moon in relation with the sun. When we see a portion of the moon shadowed and invisible, it is not because the Earth's shadow, but because the dark portion of the moon is the half that is turned away from the sun. Half of the moon is always in shadow and half is always illuminated. But we perceive different phases based on the moon's position in relation to us. Sometimes, when the moon is in one of its crescent phases, we can still see the darkened area of the moon's near side shining dimly. This effect is caused by the sun's light reflecting off the Earth's surface onto the face of the moon. Because Earth at that point in its orbit is nearly full from the moon's perspective, the light it reflects, called earthshine, is bright enough to dimly illuminate the darkened surface. Just like the moon, the Earth too has light phases according to the position of the sun and the Earth's placement in its revolution. The Earth's phases in its rotation around the sun is what Enoch is describing in chapter 72 as the sun moves through the portal gates. The fractional portions of light and dark are given to us at the end of each month throughout the year. It takes 19 solar years for the moon to return to the exact same phase and day. Not 3 years, 19 years. Consequently, a new or full moon at the vernal equinox would take 19 years to return. So we are going to look back at the phases of the moon from the last new moon on the vernal equinox in 2015 through to the next new moon on the vernal equinox in 2072. We will do this mainly in 3, 12, and 19-year increments. Now, like I said, the rhythm would be the same regardless of any phase tracked. We will start our count on the year 2012, as it is the beginning of the 12-year leap year cycle within the counts of 3 years. And I'll explain more on that here in a minute as we work through it. But what I found interesting was the period of 2014 through 2015. The moon had the rare Tetrad events. Now, a tetrad, if you don't remember, is a phenomenon where 4 consecutive eclipse seasons each contain a total lunar eclipse. In other words, it is 4 blood moons in a row, about 6 months apart. The term comes from the Greek word tetras, which means a group of 4. Because the Jewish use of the moon, especially the new moon, the last Tetrad aligned with Jewish religious observances. Many believed this was a celestial signpost, which some very important events were about to occur. And, well, I guess if we look back, I guess they were kind of right? 2015, you remember all the headlines and the harbingers and the end is coming, the end is coming. Well, here we are now in 2022, and it sure feels like the end is coming, doesn't it, folks? Now, the next Tetrad will happen in 2033. That will be the next Tetrad season, following with a new moon at the vernal equinox on 2034, March 20th. Now, a super tetrad is another phenomenon where 4 consecutive eclipse seasons contain a total lunar eclipse plus a total or annular solar eclipse. In other words, it is a series of 8 full eclipses in a row. No partials or prenumbrals over a period of about 18 months. A super tetrad is extremely rare. And so far, according to timedate.com, their data shows that they have found only 2. One in the years 2043 through 2044. So that was 10 years after our next tetrad. And the years 3707 and 3708. Now, the Jews believe that the year following the destruction of the Holy Temple was the first year of a 7-year sabbatical cycle. On the Jewish calendar, this was the year 3829, or 68 through 69 AD on the secular calendar. By counting sevens from that date, the Jews observed a Shemitah in the year from September 2014 through September 2015. Many also believe that the 2015-2016 year was a Jubilee year, which would be the first year of the new cycle. So let's take a look at the moon cycles now from 2012 to 2072. And we will see where the leap years and the new moons and how the moon cycle works. So 2012 was the beginning of the 12-year leap year count within this 3-year cycle we're going to look at. So 2012 was a leap year, and the moon was 28 days old. 3 years later, 2015 was a new moon at the vernal equinox. 3 years, people tell us, should be another new moon at the new year to prove that it's the new year. And 3 years later, in 2018, on the vernal equinox, the moon is a waxing crescent. It is 3 days old. New moon, 2015. 2018, the moon is 3 days old. In the 4th year, in 2019, the moon is 15 days old. So it jumps way ahead in that 4th year. And then in 2021, which would be the 3rd year after the 2018 count, the moon is in the waxing crescent. It's 6 days old. 2024 now is another leap year. And the moon is 10 days old. So it advanced 4 days because of that leap year. We had 3-day advance, a 3-day advance, and now a 4-day advance. In 2027, the moon is in a waxing gibbous phase, 13 days old. In 3030, the moon is a waning gibbous, 16 days old. So it was just full. In 2033, it's a waning gibbous, 19 days old. Now, 2034 is a new moon, 19 years later at the vernal equinox. So even though it doesn't fall in line yet with our 3-year count, it does fall in line in that 19-year count of the Metonic cycle. So a new moon would have been in 2034 at the vernal equinox, 19 years later. So let's continue on with our 3-year count from 2033 now to 2036. And 2036 is a leap year. So there's now a 4-day difference. That 4 days marks the leap years. Now, I'm not sure why we had a 2-day difference between 36 and 39. I don't know what will be happening celestially then. But we see that the rhythm is pretty static. It goes from 3 to 4 on the leap years, and then 3, 3, 3, and then a leap year 4. So 2048 was a leap year, 6 days old. 2051, waxing gibbous, 9 days old. 2054, waxing gibbous, 12 days old. In the year 2053 is a new moon at the vernal equinox. So that's part of the 19-year cycle, but it's not yet within our 3-year cycle. It is part of the 19-year new moon cycle. And in 2053, we will also align with the Venetian 8-year cycle. Venus has an 8-year cycle that it will show back up next to the moon every 8 years. You see it, Venus next to the moon, in 8 years it's going to be next to the moon again. And so in 2053, we align with the 8-year Venetian cycle. And the year 2072, where it all meets back up again, new moon at the vernal equinox within the 3-year count from 2015. So we can clearly see the rhythm and progression of the lunar cycles. Every 3 years, the moon cycle progressed 3 days more than the previous 3rd year, except on the leap years when the lunar phase advanced 4 days. The leap occurs every 12 years in the 3-year cycle. This current cycle culminates in 2072, as we just saw, with a new moon at the vernal equinox, and it's also a leap year. Interesting that it lines up on a leap year and the vernal equinox and a new moon. That's an alignment there of 3 things that doesn't happen that often. Sadly, I would have to live to be 110 years old to see it. But I don't know. Who knows? It could happen, right? Now, it may just look like the moon was progressing 1 day for every 3 years, but as we saw in 2019, in the 4th year after the new moon at the vernal equinox, there was a 15-day advancement in 4 years, and not 4 as we would expect if the moon was merely advancing a day per year. In 2017, just 2 years later, the moon is at day 22 of her cycle. Yet, when we return to the 3-year cycle, the increment increases fall back into the rhythm of 3s until the 12th year, when there is a 4-day increase, which marks the leap year. And although the new moon falls on the vernal equinox every 19 years, it takes 57 years for the new moon to fall in line with the 3-year cycle at the vernal equinox. That is 1 jubilee and a week of years. The priests would have understood this rhythm and therefore would not have been waiting for a new or full moon every 3 years at the vernal equinox to confirm the new year. The job or sign of the new year was assigned to the sun and star leaders. It is the straight path of the rising sun due east and crossing the divide, setting due west, witnessed by the rising of the barley star Spica and the setting of Orion. Unlike the Jews today who use the moon to set their months and feast days, the priests were counting lunations, not to keep track of months or the new year, but rather the third year tithe, sabbatical, and jubilee years. If we plot out the families from the scrolls, we can quickly realize that the priests were using the priestly order along with the lunation cycles like an abacus to keep track of the jubilees. In doing so, they would also have been able to keep track of the sabbatical and third year tithes as well. The cycle begins with Gamule. Every 19 years is Gamule. If we count the 19th year as being the start of the next count, like the priests were counting the jubilees, the count always aligns Gamule. Throughout the rotation, Gamule is also numbers 7 and 13. Each name in the rotation has its own set of 3 number revolutions, which are 19 years apart, when 19 is also counted as 1 in the cycle. Shechaniah, who is also part of the scroll's equation, is the numbers 4, 10, and 16. 2 full cycles of Gamule. So we would have 19 years plus 18 years equals 37 years. So those would be the completion, 2 full cycles of Gamule. A 19 year, but because 19 is counted as 1, that would be 18 years. So 37 years and 1/2 cycle of Shechaniah. So a 10-year cycle. So the 10 years of Shechaniah plus the 2 cycles of Gamule equals 47 years. This gave the priests the advance warning they needed in order to alert the people that the year of preparation was approaching. A great preparation could begin in storing food for the sabbatical, jubilee, and first planting until harvest. Without having advance warning, many of the people could potentially starve, as no crops were allowed to be grown in the sabbatical or the jubilee years. I also think that the third year tithe could possibly correspond with the year of preparation as well, allowing the widows and orphans to survive the shortages they would find in the fields. So they would need to know in advance to start preparing, and using the cycles of Gamule and Shechaniah, they were able to keep track of the sabbatical years so they can warn the people in advance. Leviticus 25, starting with verse 18. And you shall do my statutes, and you shall keep my judgments, and shall do them, and you shall live on the land securely. Verse 19, and the land shall give its fruits, and you shall eat to satisfaction, and you shall dwell securely on it. Verse 20, and when you say, what shall we eat in the 7th year? For lo, we may not sow, nor gather our increase. Then I have commanded my blessing on you in the 6th year, and it shall produce the increase for 3 years. You shall sow the 8th year, and shall eat the old crop until the 9th year. Until coming in of its crop, you shall eat of the old. So after 7 cycles of sabbatical years, the 50th year was proclaimed a jubilee. Again, the land was to rest from cultivation, and all the families that had become poor and had mortgaged their land could return to their possessions. These were major economic laws given by Yahuwah, designed to prevent undue wealth acquired through acquisition of farmland from accumulating in the hands of the rich, while the poor become further destitute. Now, while talking with my husband about what I was discovering with the priestly order and the Metonic cycle, I thought, what if 2015 was the start of Gamule. Where would we be today in 2022 in the sabbatical cycle? So let's take a look. And in 2022, we find ourselves in year 1 of the second cycle. We are in Jediah. So that means 2021 was a sabbatical year. So that's where we would be today if 2015 was in fact the beginning of Gamule at the new moon at the vernal equinox. We also find the same order of names confirmed in scroll 4Q328 as the heads of the priestly cycles. 4Q320 and 4Q321 are two scrolls that many base their understanding of the priestly calendar on. Let's then take a look at what these scrolls have to say about the use of the moon. 3 central concepts appear in these particular scrolls. First, an unnamed lunar phenomenon, designated X by modern scholars, which appear either on the 29th or 30th day of the lunar cycle. Second, a number of days that have passed since the previous X. And third, a lunar phenomenon called Duke, D-U-Q. None of these 3 items are mentioned together in any one scroll. 4Q320 records items 1 and 2, while 4Q321 refers to 1 and 3. Now 4Q321 is the only place we see this word Duke. The cycle within these scrolls also began with Gamule and concurrently aligned with the lunar phenomenon X. Since the 364-day year begins at the spring equinox, the lunar text from Qumran tied the lunar phases to the cyclic march of the sabbatical years and lunar cycles. Now, there's great debate and controversy over which lunar phase the priests were tracking because of this obscure word, Duke, used in the scroll 4Q321. This word seems to be describing one of the phases or signs of the moon. Before the Dead Sea Scroll discovery, scholars had never encountered this word, so they really are not sure of its precise meaning. Reasoning from etymology, they believe that Duke most likely means carefully examined. Given the context in which Duke occurs, it is either the new moon or the full moon. If it refers to a new moon, then the lunar month began at the full moon. But if it refers to the full moon, then the lunar month began on a new moon. Enoch tells us that when the moon first shows her light, she is in her new phase on the 30th day of the lunar cycle. With 10 distinguishable copies of the Book of Enoch found in Qumran, I think these people would have been well aware how the Creator instructed Enoch in the division of the lunar months. Enoch 73:4, and thus she rises, and her first phase in the east comes forth on the 30th morning. On that day she becomes visible and constitutes for you the first phase of the moon on the 30th day, together with the sun in the portal where she rises. We're going to talk more about that portal here in a minute. Enoch 78:11. During all the period during which the moon is growing in her light, she is transferring it to herself when opposite the sun. During 14 days of her light is accomplished in the heaven, and when she is illuminated throughout, her light is accomplished full in the heaven. And on the first day she is called the new moon, and on that day the light rises upon her. She becomes full exactly on the day when the sun sets in the west, and from the east she rises at night, and the moon shines the whole night, through till the sun rises over against her, and the moon is seen over against the sun. And on the side whence the light of the moon comes forth, there again she wanes, till all the light vanishes, and all the days of the month are at an end, and her circumference is empty, void of light. At the end of each lunar month, the 29th lunar day, the moon rises with the sun and runs across the sky cloaked in his sunlight. This is the lunar conjunction. On the 30th day, or the first phase, the moon rises about 50 minutes behind the sun, and lit is a small sliver, but still too close to the sun for us to see. At this point, the small sliver of light is less than 1%. Now, during all the years I went out to sight the new moon, we could rarely see a 1% moon. The atmospheric conditions had to be perfect. Most months, the moon was between 2 and 3% before we could see them. According to Enoch, this would make the moon already a couple days old. Since the options for the word Duke are still being debated among scholars, we will defer to Enoch and presume the lunar month starts at the new moon, and thus Duke is the sign carefully examined between two new moons, which is the full moon. The priests were using the full moon prior as a witness to the next true new moon for the counting of lunations to track the Jubilee years with the priestly order. They couldn't see it because it was still bathed in the sun's light. So in order to accurately know when the new moon was that they couldn't see, they could count from the full moon forward and know that this is when the new moon would be. Starting with scroll 4Q320, it says, talking about the sun is viewed across the heavens by the divide from the east to the west, from waking in the morning on the 4th day of the week under the sons of Gamul is the first of the first month, the head of the year. So right here we see Gamul is starting the cycle on the vernal equinox at the new moon. That is the first day of the year, not the day after the vernal equinox, but the day the sun is crossing the great divide from east to west. Another translation of this passage says, to become visible from the east and shine in the center of the sky, at the base of the vault, from, and then it's blank, but some translators have put from evening to morning on the 4th of the week of 4. On the 4th of the week of 4, the sons of Gamul in the first month of the first year. So because of the wording, some believe that this is speaking about a full moon, because only a full moon would be seen from the start of the evening to the start of the morning. A full moon is rising as the sun is setting. That is what delineates a full moon, is it is rising as the sun is setting. And so they think this fragmented portion of this translation is saying that it's a full moon. The problem with this theory is the mathematics just don't work out. Once we start plotting the rest of the scrolls, these are only fragments of information, and the missing parts would seem to hold the key to these first verses. And yet there's enough information that clearly establishes the relationship of the observation of the equinox the crossing the heaven by the divide, with the first day of the year. It also confirms that the first day of the year can only be placed on the fourth day of the week to start the year. But what the moon was doing on that day can be witnessed by the rest of the scrolls. On the fourth of the week, the sons of Gamul, in the first month of the first year. Confirmation that Gamul was in service on the first day of the new year, which is the vernal equinox on the fourth day of the week. When we look at the very next verse, we see that the 29th day of the lunar month is on the 30th day of the solar month. Remember that the 29th day is the conjunction, according to Enoch, when the moon is in the full light of the sun. Not a full moon, but in its full light. The scrolls read, the 5th day of Jedediah to the 29th day of the lunar month, on the 30th of the first solar month. Jedediah's service begins on the 25th day of the first solar month. Adding 5 days, we arrive at the 30th solar day. Counting backwards through the lunar phases from the information given would make the sign of Gamul the new moon at the vernal equinox. Continuing through the scroll, we see how it tells the story of the yearly Sabbaths being counted by the sun and the Sabbaths of years by the moon. The Sabbath of Hakkaz is the last Sabbath of the second month on the 30th day of the solar calendar. The first of Elishib, the 29th lunar day on the 29th of the third solar month. The third of Bilgah is the 30th lunar day on the 28th of the fourth solar month. The first of Jehoiarib on the 30th lunar day on the 22nd of the 12th solar month of the second year. Okay, so that's a complete year there. Again, if we look at 2015 as our starting point in Gamul, according to this scroll, the moon's phase on the 20th of the first solar month in the second year would be the conjunction. In 2016, the equinox was technically on the 19th of March because of being a leap year. 20 days later, on April 7th, 2016, the moon was at the conjunction. So we have another year cycle like that. And then from there, it lays out the feasts within the priestly courses for 6 years, but no more moon information. So scroll 4321 and 4321a carries on the rhythm of this priestly cycle. 4Q321 starts in the 7th month of the first year, and like we said before, this is the scroll that we find the controversial word duke. Now what I found in trying to research this for myself, as the book I have on the subject of the Dead Sea Scrolls doesn't have the complete text of scrolls. And what I found was that many translations of 4Q321 had the author or commentator's opinion injected for the word duke. So one translation is going to tell you one thing, one translation is going to tell you another. It all depends on what that particular author thinks that word means. Also, the breakup of the punctuation of the verses varies from translation to translation, which can change the whole sequence of what is being conveyed. So please be careful when looking at translations. Are they original or are they partial opinion? I was only able to find a partial translation which still contained the word duke. but this helped to set the pattern when plotting out the data. So reading from 4Q 321, we start on the first day in the week of Jediah, which falls on the 12th in the 7th month. Now this is a partial verse. It's not complete. And the words that are missing here are probably and Duke. So it would read, and Duke on the first day in the week of Jediah, which falls on the 12th, in it the 7th month. And we conclude that because of just the rhythm of the scroll, as we will see. And it goes on and says, on the second day in the week of Abiah, which falls on the 25th of the 8th month, and the Duke is on the third day of the week of Mijamin, which falls on the 12th in the 8th month. So the Duke happened before the other sign, the other lunar sign. So the Duke happened first, and then the other sign, X, fell on the 25th of the 8th month. So we can see here that the full moon on the 12th day of the 8th month is witness to the following new moon on the 25th of the 8th month. Then it goes on to read, on the third day in the week of Jakim, which falls on the 24th in the 9th month, and Duke is on the 4th day in the week of Shechaniah, which falls on the 11th in it the 9th month. On the 5th day of the week of Immer, which falls on the 23rd in the 10th month, and the Duke is on the 6th day in the week of Jeshbeab, which falls on the 10th in the 10th month. Okay, so now we're to the second year. And it says, the first month on the second day of the week, Malchijah, which falls on the 20th in the first month. So this scroll confirms what we just learned and the moon's phase for Malchijah. And the Duke is on the third day of the week of Harim, which falls on the 7th in the first month. Once we align scrolls 4Q321 with 4Q320, we can see that it's highly probable that Duke is the full moon. Skipping past the second year, you can find those charts on our website. I would like to fast forward to the third year, for this is the year that it is claimed will again align the moon's phase with the new year. So continuing with scroll 4Q321, and it reads, in the third year, the new moon was on the 10th day of the first month, and the full moon was on the 27th day of the first month. Neither the new or full moon falls on the new year in the third year, according to scroll 4Q321. Okay, so we can continue on, and we will have these charts on our website that you can look at. I'm not sure how or why people think that the moon returns to the same phase to mark the new year every 3 years. I searched and searched to try to understand how that can be, to no avail. As we saw how every 3 years the cycle had advanced by 3 days. Because of the Metonic cycle, it would be impossible for the moon to be at the same phase on the vernal equinox new year, or any date for that matter, in just 3 years. The only thing the moon returns to is the same star leaders. And whether you agree or disagree with our take on the word Duke, the moon works the same way regardless the phase you track. The priests were tracking lunations, 235 lunations in the Metonic cycle. Within the cycles of the 3-year tithe, 7-year sabbatical, and 49-year jubilee, creating an algorithm paralleling the priestly courses, starting with the new moon at the new year in Gamule. In conjunction with the Metonic cycle, it essentially is a priestly supercomputer. The sun marks the start of the year each year with its straight path rising due east, traveling across the divide of the sky and setting due west. The moon's lunations keep track of the third-year tithe, sabbatical, and jubilee years, aligning with Gamule in the first year at the vernal equinox and new moon, perfectly fulfilling the requirements of Genesis 1:14 through 16. And why wouldn't the moon be new in her phase on the day time began? The priest believed that the angels were their heavenly counterparts. This sets the priestly order of jubilees in the heavens since Olam time, since time began, and will continue into the millennium. The moon has her place and her assigned duties in heaven. Never is she to be used to set months, Sabbaths, or feasts by, making an unclean day into a clean day and a holy day unholy. This is where she is darkness to the sinner. Rather, she marks the years of tithe that lift up and sustain the poor, the years of rest for the land, and the years of release, so that poverty did not become a lifestyle. A blessing indeed for the righteous who use her properly. Next, let's look at Enoch and dig for more truth about our lovely reflector, the moon. Enoch 41, verses 5 through 8. I saw the chambers of the sun and moon, whence they proceed and whether they come again, and their glorious return, and how one is superior to the other, and their stately orbit, and how they do not leave their orbit, and they add nothing to their orbit, and they take nothing from it, and they keep faith with each other in accordance with the oath by which they are bound together. And first the sun goes forth and transverses this path according to the commandment of the Master of Spirits, and mighty is his name forever and ever. And after that I saw the hidden and visible path of the moon, and she accomplishes the course of her path in that place by day and by night, the one holding a position opposite to the other before the Master of Spirits. And they give thanks and praise and rest not, for unto them is their thanksgiving rest. Enoch 72, verses 3 and 4. And I saw 6 gates, which the sun rises, and 6 gates, which the sun sets. And the moon rises and sets in these gates, and the leaders of the stars, and those whom they lead, 6 in the east, and 6 in the west, and all following each other in accurately corresponding order. Also, many windows to the right and left of these gates. From our perspective here on Earth, the sun and moon travel across the sky, not only east to west each day, but also north and south. On the winter solstice, in the northern hemisphere, the sun is at its furthest point in the south and starts its trek northward until it reaches its furthest northern point on the summer solstice. When the sun reaches midpoint between north and south is the equinoxes. What it takes the sun to do in a solar year's travel, the moon does in one lunar month, moving through all the portal gates through the stations during that time. In chapter 73, Enoch is introducing us to the basic movements of the moon. The moon moves across the expanse of the heaven through the same portal gates as the sun and stars. Its light comes in measured portions, or what we call the phases of the moon. The moon moves through the heavens like the sun, who provides her with light in measurements. And although the lunar month starts with the same new lunar phase, the solar month does not. Her settings are different from solar month to solar month. Now, I could spend a lot of time talking about how the moon moves through the heavens, but for the sake of time, we'll refer you to Stellarium or similar software. It's really important just to see how the moon works through its phases and what Enoch is saying. A lot of times people say, well, this is proof that the moon starts the year. No, this is just Enoch telling us how the moon works. I do want to address Enoch 74:5, though, as it pertains to the middle gates. And since it is the fourth gate where the sun starts the new year, let's see what Enoch has to say about what the moon is doing. And is it the marker for a new year? Enoch 74:5. For 2 months, the moon, sets with the sun. It uses those two middle openings, which are the third and fourth gate. The moon technically sets with the sun during the conjunction, with the new moon setting right behind. The sun is only in the middle gates during the months of the equinoxes. Remember that the scrolls have Gamule starting the cycle at the equinox on the new moon. Enoch says here, for 2 months, the moon sets with the sun in these two middle openings. The sun is only in the middle openings of the equinox, and the moon only sets with the sun when it is in conjunction or shortly after in the new moon phase, phase 1, day 30. So day 29, day 30, the moon is setting with the sun. And then she starts receding from the sun. Enoch 74:6. And it comes out for 7 days and completes a circuit as it returns again to the gate through which the sun rises. In this manner, it waxes and recedes from the sun, entering the 6th gate through which the sun rises in 8 days. In this manner, it waxes. The moon is getting bigger, growing from new moon to full moon in 15 days. We see it comes out in 7 days, and in this manner, it waxes and recedes and returns and rises in 8 days. So 7 and 8 equals 15 as it moves away from the sun, so in 15 days. Enoch 74:7. When the sun rises through the 4th gate, the moon comes out for 7 days until it starts coming out through the 5th. It then turns back towards the 4th gate in 7 days, waxing as it recedes, and enters the 1st gate in 8 days. Then again, it returns to the 4th gate through which the sun rises in 7 days. So we have 7 days plus 7 days plus 8 days plus 7 days. That equals 29 days or 1 synodic month. Verse 74:9. Thus I beheld their stations, as according to the fixed order of the months the sun rises and sets. We've been talking about the lunar Synodic month, where the phases of the moon repeat every 29 days. However, we can also measure the moon as it returns to the same spot in the sky. This happens every 27 days and is called the sidereal lunar month. The sidereal lunar month is defined according to the moon's orbit with respect to the celestial sphere. It is the length of time for the moon to return to the same position in respect to the fixed stars. The length of the sidereal month is 27 days. Using this type of month, the sky can be divided into 28 lunar mansions. The average between the Synodic 29 days and the sidereal 27 days is 28 days, or 28 stations. Ancient cultures have always looked to the sky as a timekeeping device. Just as the sun's motions throughout the zodiac mark changes throughout the year, the moon's motion throughout the night sky marks the changes throughout the months. For this purpose, the moon's own zodiac was designed based on her position in relation to notable star groupings. These are the 28 lunar mansions, or stations. Observances and recordings of the moon through these stations against the stars appear in several cultures. The lunar stations are determined by the position of the moon as she circles the earth. And although many cultures use these mansions or stations for astrology purposes and future predictions, just as many do with the solar zodiac sign that aligns with their birth dates, our emphasis is on biblical astronomy. Thus, we want to avoid astrological associations of any kind unless they can shed added light on the truth. As we have seen in other cases where ancient mythologies have preserved truths prior to astrological corruptions having set in. What we can glean from this information is the understanding of the path of the moon's yearly circuit against the fixed stars. Just like we see the sun moving from constellation to constellation, the moon too moves through those same constellations. And let's remember that it is the stars who are the leaders of time. The stars set the background story as the sun and moon move across them, like cursors moving across a document on your computer screen, declaring their individual stories day and night, season by season, and year by year. It takes the moon 13 cycles to complete its trek through the 28 stellar stations. 13 cycles times 28 days equals 364-day year. The exact amount of time Enoch and the Book of Jubilees tells us is the length of the year. Now, Enoch is going to give us a math lesson starting with verse 10. Enoch 74:10. And at those times there is an excess of 30 days belonging to the sun in 5 years. All the days belonging to each year of 5 years, when completed, amount to 364 days. And the sun and the stars belong 6 days, 6 days in each of the 5 years. Thus 30 days belong to them. So the moon has 30 days less than the sun and stars. In 3 years, there are 1,092 days. In 5 years, 1,820 days. So that in 8 years, there are 2,912 days. Now, I've been told by some that these verses in Enoch are proof that we have to wait for the moon to determine the new year because the moon cannot reckon the year, as it falls behind the sun 10 days each year. And that is true. It does fall behind the sun 10 days each year. And the Book of Jubilees also verifies that this is true. And this is why the Jews have to add a leap month every 3 years. They are adding days to the year that do not equal 364 and are not named with the leaders in Enoch chapter 82. They argue that a 364-day year must be the average of 3 years. But that is not what Enoch says at all. I have even seen some real fancy math out there trying to explain how it all works, including using pi. Now, I always like a little pie, but not when it comes to mathematics. I mean, I think the Creator made things a lot less complicated than that. After all, his language is a visual one, made for pea-brains like me. His moed would be set by the visual aspects of the heavens. Again, easy enough that even the lowliest shepherd out in the field could understand the Creator's division of days. I don't think those shepherd boys knew how to determine pi. So let's break down what we've read so far bit by bit and see if we can figure out this for ourselves. So we have 364 days times 3 years. That equals 1,092 solar days. 5 years, 1,820 solar days. 8 years, 2,912 solar days, just like we were told in Enoch. Now we're going to do the math for the moon. Notice that Enoch says in verse 12 that the moon also, within its station, like the sun and stars, bring all the years exactly to 364 days. Enoch 74:14. To the moon alone belongs in 3 years 1,062 days. In 5 years, it has 50 days less than the sun, for an addition being made to the 1,062 days. In 5 years, there are 1,770 days, and the days of the moon in 8 years are 2,832 days. For its days in 8 years are less than those of the sun by 80 days, which 80 days are its diminution in 8 years. So what does that mean? The word diminution means to become less. So in other words, the days between the solar and lunar will now be less than 80 days as the cycle repeats. The year then truly becomes complete according to the stations of the moon and the stations of the sun, which rise in the different gates, which rise and set in them for 30 days. Through the gates that the sun, moon, and stars all move through. This is confirmed in the very next chapter, Enoch 75:1. These are the leaders of the chiefs of thousands, those which preside over all the creation and over all the stars, with the 4 days which are added in and never separated from the place allotted them, according to the complete calculation of the year. Verse 2, and these serve 4 days, which are not calculated in the calculation of the year. Respecting them, men greatly err, for these luminaries truly serve in the dwelling place of the world. 1 day in the first gate, 1 in the third gate, 1 in the fourth gate, and 1 in the sixth gate. And the harmony of the world becomes complete every 364th state of it. Enoch tells us that his writings are for the understanding of the latter-day generation. We certainly cannot deny that the calendar found within his writings are being manifested in the here and now. More than ever, people are seeking the understanding of the Creator's division of time. Meeting with Eloah at the correct time is his mark on his people. Eloah gave his calendar to man through the Torah, through inspired writings like Enoch and Jubilees, and by the natural order of the movement of the heavens. Yet, as written in the book of Jubilees, Yahuwah knew man would still mess it up. This is why we must deprogram and reboot our minds to the simplicity of Elohah's creation. If we become once again in tune with nature, the way Yahuwah ordained it, we will live in harmony with his word and his set times. The moon has her place and her assigned duties in heaven. Never is she to be used to set years, months, Sabbaths, or feasts by, making an unclean day into a clean day, and a holy day unholy. This is where she is darkness to the sinner. Rather, she marks the years of tithe that lift up and sustain the poor, the years of rest for the land, and the years of release, so that poverty did not become a lifestyle. A blessing indeed for the righteous who use her properly. So I hope you've enjoyed this study on the moon, and we can now understand what her assigned duties were on the fourth day, and how the priests used her as a supercomputer, keeping track of the Jubilees through Gamul and Shechaniah. So until we meet again, I wish you shalom, shalom.
Shalom, shalom.